All right, Dalton, we ranked our top 10 quarterback rooms in college football, top 10 running back units in college football. Now's a really fun one. The top 10 receiving cores in college football that you could find over at pff.com. Just a reminder, these are my rankings that I'm going to break down for you guys really quickly, and Dalton's going to react to them. And make sure you guys react to them, too, in the comment section below, and let me know how stupid these rankings are as well. But just for receiving cores, kind of break it down, it's not just wide receivers. It's basically anyone that can affect the passing game as a receiver, whether it be wide receivers, tight ends, even running backs. If they're really good out of the backfield receiving the ball, they are included in this ranking as well. So receivers, tight ends, and running backs. So that makes up an entire receiving core. So start off with my number 10 through 6. At number 10 is Oklahoma, who brings back 5 of its 6 leading receivers from a year ago, only losing Drake Stoops. Nick Anderson's the leader of those returners. He had 10 receiving touchdowns last year, which were second in the Big 12 to only A.D. Mitchell. And then Jaleel Farouk and Andro Anthony also came back, and they combined for over 1,100 yards this past season. And they also added Deion Burks from Purdue in the transfer portal, and Baylor tight end Jake Roberts. Burks was second in the Big 10 with 18 broken tackles. And Roberts, even though he's a backup tight end for Baylor, he was still 9th in the Big 12 with 143 yards after the catch. So number 10 is Oklahoma, and at number 9 is LSU, which might be a surprise for some people after they lost Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., who are both first-round receivers, but they really hit the transfer portal really hard, getting guys like C.J. Daniels from Liberty, getting guys like Xavion Thomas from Mississippi State. Daniels led the nation with nearly 4 yards per route run last year, while Xavion Thomas was second on Mississippi State with over 500 yards. And they also bring back Kyron Lacey, who was a number 3 receiver last year, and he was second among Power 5 receivers with a 150 passer rating when targeted. Mason Taylor is back at tight end for the 3rd straight year as their top tight end. And they also brought in a 5-star recruit in true freshman Tre'Dez Green at tight end as well. So number 9 is LSU. Number 8 is Colorado, who has a great quarterback in Shedeur Sanders, and he has a great receiving core to throw to as well in Travis Hunter. Maybe their top receiver, their top corner as well. The cover athlete of EA College Football 25, one of the best players in college football. He's a great receiver. In fact, I believe he was a top 5 receiver for both Trevor Sikkema and Connor Rogers in the receiver rankings episode you can find on NFL Stock Exchange for the NFL Draft. Jimmy Horn Jr. is back as well. He led the team with 6 receiving touchdowns last year. They also added LeJontay Wester from FAU, Dalton, and at Vanderbilt's Will Shepherd as well. Wester was a top 15 receiver in the country in terms of receiving yards, and Shepherd tied for 9th in the country with 14 contested catches. Number 7 is Miami, who has 3 receivers who had at least 800 yards last season. Xavier Strepo, top 5 receiver in the country. He's one of the best slot receivers in the country as well. He had over 1,100 yards last year. Jacoby George had the 2nd most yards after the catch in the ACC last year. Samuel Brown transferred from Houston. He led Houston in receiving yards last year with 800 and placed 2nd in the Big 12 with 20 broken tackles on catches. And at number 6, Dalton, this is one I might regret a little bit, so if you want them higher, I completely understand. It is the Missouri Tigers. I put them here at number 6, but a lot of people were mad about that. I went back and looked at it even more, and this was after the article came out, and I was like, maybe they could have been a little bit higher. Maybe I was wrong with that one. But Missouri's got the best receiver in college football, Luther Burden III. Had a 91 receiving grade this past year, which was 3rd in the country. Also 3rd in the country with over 700 yards after the catch. They returned their top 5 receivers from last year with Burden, Theo Weiss, Mookie Cooper, Marquise Johnson, and tight end Brett Norfleet. Weiss had the most contested catches in the SEC. Johnson, rising star, Dalton, that you really like as well. He had 383 receiving yards in very limited action, and he was one of only 2 receivers in the country with a perfect passer rating when targeted. So those are my 10 through 6, Dalton. Is there anything that stands out among those first 5?
Yeah, I think there's a lot. There's some really fun groups here. I think Missouri does stand out. Max, their wide receivers, if you just isolate their wide receivers last year, they were 8th in the country in receiving grade. And now they're all getting a year older. And you're right, Marquise Johnson, I think, could be the breakout receiver of the SEC. You mentioned, I think it was 383 receiving yards on just 13 catches. It makes almost no sense.
Yeah.
He's a former track guy in high school. He's got speed you can't teach. And I think there's a similar dynamic you could come into the season with where, like with LSU last year, right, where we already knew Malik Neighbors was really, really good, right? And then he had a Superman year. But Brian Thomas 2 years ago had just over 250 yards, I believe it was. And then he exploded onto the scene this past year. I could see the same thing from Marquise Johnson. I actually believe he might be the key to their entire season, right? Not sure about the running game yet. You lost your best offensive lineman in Javon Foster. You lost Cody Schrader, even though you're bringing in Marcus Carroll. If Johnson can be a more consistent big play threat for them, they might have the best passing attack in the SEC out of any team, right? Colorado, I think a lot of people, look, they're the most controversial team in college football right now, but I think the two things you can't question are the quarterback and the receivers, right? Travis Hunter's a beast. Jimmy Horn's really good. LaJohntay Wester, maybe it's the FAU homer in me right now, but he carried that offense for 2 years. He was all they had on offense for the last 2 years. He's legit one of the best slot receivers in the country, and now he goes to a team that throws the ball more to slot receivers than any other team in the nation. You could see Wester really freeing up Hunter both to play more defense and play more on the outside. Anytime they've got all four of those guys on the field, Colorado's going to be really, really dangerous as long as Shedeur is protected. And I think there's an interesting situation down in LSU right now. Watching Garrett Nussmeier tape, he's a vertical passer, man. He wants to stand in the pocket and throw the ball downfield. The more I watch Nussmeier, I don't think there's a better fit at receiver for them, especially replacing Neighbors and Thomas, than getting C.J. Daniels from Liberty. He's a big-time deep threat. Caden Salter was throwing the ball deep like crazy down there last year while they were going undefeated. I think LSU, if things gel together and Nussmeier can continue, because they're going to have the pass protection for him, right? He's a true pocket passer. He has yet to scramble a single time in his career. He's going to stand in the pocket and throw the ball downfield. I think C.J. Daniels in for a big-time impact as a transfer to LSU.
Yeah, absolutely. So is there anything you would change in that top 10? Is there anyone that maybe you would put in that top 10 in that 10 through 6 range? Just for reference, I think Tennessee would have been number 11 for me. They have a really good receiving core coming back with Squirrel White, Brew McCoy, and Chris Brazzell from Tulane transferring in. Is there anything you would change or anyone that you might add into that top 10, maybe put someone higher, put someone lower, anything like that?
No, I think exactly what you said at number 10. The other team I thought about was Tennessee, because that's a really good group, and you've got Iamaleava's got like a ton of weapons there, and Chris Brazzell was really, really good at Tulane. That can't be understated. Tennessee is the one team I would think about an argument, and like you said, I think Missouri and Colorado could be higher on this list. If you wanted, like, to me, take your number 4 team that we're going to get to in a minute, and it's more when you add in tight ends and backs and everything, then it gets a little more complicated. But as far as just pure wide receiver cores, Missouri and Colorado are two of the best in the country, maybe two of the top 5.
Yeah, I completely understand that. I think that Missouri, looking back on even more and watching Marquise Johnson tape even more after this list came out, I was like, oh man, maybe they should be a little higher. You got Burden, Theo Weiss, Marquise Johnson, Brett Norfleet, guys like that, Mookie Cooper. It is ridiculous what they bring back, but they're not in the top 5. So we'll start with our top 5 now. At number 5 is Texas. So Texas lost their 5 top receivers from this past season, all to the NFL draft, but there's still a top 5 receiving core in the country for how aggressive it was in the transfer portal. They brought in a potential first-round pick at receiver in Isaiah Bond from Alabama. And, Dalton, one of our top 10 tight ends in the country, and we think a breakout star, also from Alabama, in Amari Niblack, as well as a super athletic tight end that they got. Bond was second among FBS receivers last year with 18 plays where he had at least 20 miles per hour in our GPS tracking. 18 plays where he hit 20 miles per hour. The only one who had more was former Texas receiver Xavier Worthy, who broke the 40-yard dash at the NFL Combine. So Isaiah Bond is a speedster, maybe the fastest receiver that we have in college football right now. Niblack scored in the 99th percentile of our game athleticism score metric as well. So 2 athletic freaks they added. They also added Silas Bolden from Oregon State, who led the Beavers last year with 741 receiving yards. Matthew Golden also transferred in there from Houston. He tied for 7th in the Big 12 last year with 6 receiving touchdowns. They also bring back Jonte Cook, who's entering his sophomore year. He was a 5-star recruit in the 2023 class and should figure into the offense a lot heavier in his second year there as well. So Texas checks in there at number 5. Even though they lost so much to the NFL draft, they brought in so much from the transfer portal as well, which is the reason why they're number 5. At number 4 is Georgia, the school that you were alluding to earlier, Dalton. And you mentioned the tight end room, man. They lose the greatest tight end of all time in college football in Brock Bowers. They still have the best tight end room in the country by a mile, honestly, because Benjamin Urasek transfers in there from Stanford. Over the last 3 years, he leads all returning tight ends in the country with over 1,300 receiving yards. He's a top 5 tight end in the country on my list as well entering the year. Oscar Dalton, literally just today, Trevor Sycamore, lead draft analyst at PFF, was talking to us about Oscar Dalton. We were like, oh, look, who's your tight end one? Like Colson Lovin by a mile, right? He's like, yeah, Lovin's great, but Oscar Delp is really freaking good too. So be on the lookout for a tight ends episode from NFL Stock Exchange coming out soon. I can tell you right now that Trevor will be very high on Oscar Delp, who might even be the number 2 tight end for Georgia this past season. He was open on over 96% of his targets, which was in the 99th percentile for all tight ends in the country. He's an elite athlete as well. Dominic Lovett is back for his senior year. He led all Georgia receivers last year with 614 yards. Ra Thomas and Dylan Bell also returned. They combined for over 700 yards last year. Georgia also added Colby Young from Miami and London Humphreys from Vanderbilt in the transfer portal. Colby Young led the ACC with 12 contested catches last year, while Humphreys was second on Vanderbilt with over 400 receiving yards too. So Georgia, unbelievable tight end room and then a really, really good wide receiver room as well. At number 3 is Ohio State, because they bring back Emeka Egbuka, who's a top 3 receiver in the country, in my opinion. Really battled injuries this past year, but the year before, he was the second most valuable receiver in the country, according to our wins above average metric, as a true sophomore, and the only one more valuable was his teammate, Marvin Harrison Jr. So Emeka Egbuka, I think, is in for a major, major bounce-back senior season. And then after that, they're really unproven at wide receiver, but it's Ohio State, man. You know they got talent in that wide receiver room. Jeremiah Smith, number 1 overall recruit in the country in 2024, and you say, okay, he's a true freshman. This guy's going to make an immediate impact. He's going to be maybe their number 2 receiver immediately on that team. And honestly, Dalton, I know I just sung Emeka Egbuka's praises. This kid is so special. He might be the number 1 guy for them by the end of the year. Honestly, I think Jeremiah Smith is a freak athlete. He's the highest rated wide receiver recruit since 2004, which was On3's first year of doing industry ratings. So by all accounts, he's the highest rated receiver we've basically ever seen come out of high school. So he is going to be an absolute superstar. We've got Larry Fitzgerald comps already for him. He is going to be a freak, man. They also have 3 other receivers who are among the 10 highest rated receivers coming out of high school, and Carnell Tate, Brandon Innes, and Mylan Graham as well. So Ohio State's still loaded at receiver, and be on the lookout for Jeremiah Smith, man, because that kid could be a superstar in his very first season. All right, number 2 is Ole Miss, who brings back a top 10 wide receiver in Trey Harris and a top 10 tight end in Caden Prieskorn. They also bring back their number 3 wide receiver for last year in Jordan Watkins, who tied for 7th among SEC players with 21 catches that went for at least 15 yards. And then also they added South Carolina star receiver Juice Wells from the transfer portal. He missed all but 3 games last year, but the year before, he was 3rd among Power 5 pass catchers with 555 yards after the catch. Virginia Tech tight end Daquan Wright also transferred to Ole Miss. He had the 3rd most receiving yards in the ACC among tight ends with over 300 as well. So Ole Miss checks in at number 2, but number 1 is Oregon. Oregon brings back the best pair of receivers in the country in Tez Johnson and Texas A&M transfer Evan Stewart. They were the only receivers in the country, or the only pair of receivers to be in the top 10 of our rankings for wide receivers heading into next year. Tez was number 4 for me, and Evan Stewart was number 9. And then also, they return 4 of their 5 leading receivers from last year. The only one who left was Troy Franklin, Trayshawn Holden, Gary Bryant Jr. They combined for nearly 900 yards and 10 touchdowns last year. Terrence Ferguson tied for 5th among all tight ends in the country with 13 forced missed tackles after the catch. And Patrick Herbert is back for another year as well as the backup tight end. And if that's not enough, Oregon also has sophomore 5-star Jurion Dickey in that receiver room as well. So Oregon checks in as my number 1 receiving core in college football. Dalton, what do you think about that top 5? Is there anyone you put in that top 5? Is there anyone you put a little bit higher, a little bit lower? What do you think about that?
I think you could certainly argue, we mentioned Missouri before, you could argue Missouri probably, as high as you want to on this list, honestly. Like there's some interesting things here. One, I find it interesting that 3 of your top 4, Ole Miss, Oregon, and Georgia, have arguably the 3 best tight end duos now in the country, right? You mentioned Georgia, but Prieskorn and Daquan Wright in Ole Miss is really good. And Ferguson, the more I watch Terrence Ferguson, especially at Oregon, man, I was he was one I was really thinking about for our top 10 list.
Yeah,
when we
same.
did the tight ends too. He's really, really good, and Patrick Herbert's a good red zone threat. You could probably argue Missouri up to 3 at least here. Like Ohio State's the interesting one because you're going off of Ibuka's 2022 and a boatload of potential, right? Like, and we've seen like with Missouri's group, they were great last year, or with Texas's group, even though they were all in different places, a lot of those players were really good last year. And I'm with you. I think Amari Niblack's the breakout tight end in the country this year. I think that's such a perfect fit for him. So fast, so athletic, and just wasn't targeted enough at Alabama, and even with the right type of targets. I think Steve Sarkisian's going to get flashbacks to when he used to coach O.J. Howard at Alabama. Like, that is such a good fit in that offense to get Niblack. I think of all of them, as far as making a list, though, the most interesting one's Ohio State, because it's like the potential thing, right? You could put him number 1 based on potential, or you could probably drop him to number 7 or 8 because you just haven't seen it yet, except for Ibuka 2 years ago. So they're the weirdest one to place. I think they have to be in here because that's just too much talent not to be in here. And I get kind of right in the middle ground at like number 3. I might even say number 4 because Missouri. I really like that group at Missouri, and just on the wide receivers alone, again, I think you could argue Colorado a little bit higher too. But I mean, I get it, man. When you're taking the entire group of these teams, right, and especially 3 of these top 4 with big time tight ends, I think this more than our first 2 lists has a lot more room for argument throughout the entire list.
I would agree. Would you agree that Oregon is number 1 for you, or would you put someone else at number 1?
I could be in on it because Johnson and Stewart, they fit the offense so perfectly, and with Dillon Gabriel throwing them the ball, the tight ends really make the good argument for me because those are 2. That's an underrated duo right there, especially Ferguson. Ferguson, if he by the end of the year was a top 6 or 7 tight end, I wouldn't be that shocked. That's really the best argument, and I think the biggest question really is just Evan Stewart and being healthy and adding some other dimension to his game. But those 2 guys, Johnson and Stewart, are such perfect fits that I could see them both having like 1,200-yard seasons. Like that's how good a fit it is. And Dillon Gabriel, I was watching Gabriel tape last night. He's really got as clean a profile passing over the last 5 years now as any quarterback in the country. Like, it's hard to envision that going disastrously wrong for any reason. So like, I get it. I think there's a lot of arguments that could be had, right? I mean, Ole Miss got a good group too if Juice Wells is healthy. Georgia's the one I question here towards the top. Who's that guy at receiver, right? Like, you've got Dominic Lovett, you've got Colby Young. Is there a number 1 guy though, right? Like, the tight ends are great. I don't know. I would be a little more questioning Georgia being this high more because of their receivers. Their tight ends are really the biggest reason they're this high. I don't know if they have a number 1 receiver. Like, I might put Missouri over Georgia.
Yeah,
right?
Looking back, I might too.
Because having that guy, having a Luther Burden, even having an Isaiah Bond, or we've seen Tej Johnson be as productive as he is, or Trey Harris, Georgia doesn't have that guy. This group is designed more for, okay, Carson Beck's the best ball distributor in the country, and we've got a boatload of weapons to distribute them to, but who's that crunch time guy when they're playing Alabama again that's just better than the guy across from him?
Yeah, that's fair. So real quickly, just recap the top 10. Number 10, Oklahoma for me. 9, LSU. 8, Colorado. 7, Miami. 6, Missouri. 5, Texas. 4, Georgia. 3, Ohio State. 2, Ole Miss. And number 1, Oregon for the best receiving cores in college football. Before we go, Dalton, can you give me quickly what you think your top 5 would be if you had to put together a list like this?
I could roll with Oregon 1. That's fine. I don't hate that. I would probably go Oregon 1. Ooh. Ole Miss at 2 is good. I don't hate that. Let's go Oregon, Ole Miss, Missouri.
Okay.
Ooh, man, I like that Colorado group. I'll say Missouri. And then let's go Texas 4 and Ohio State 5, and I might put Colorado 6.
Okay.
Their receiver group is nasty. I mean, you know me, a little bit of a homer thing, but I love Wester. Travis Hunter. If Travis Hunter were to play receiver full time, he'd be a top 5 receiver in the country. That's why like Trevor and Connor have him rated that highly. So It's a tough one, and then it's hard. Like Texas, Silas Bolden too is a great ad for them. They just have to piece it together. Yeah, I think that's man, Ohio State too. There's so much potential. That's hard, but I think I would move Missouri up to 3 and work from there.
That's fair. That's fair. So that's what we got for our top 10 receiving cores in college football. Let us know in the comments below what your top 10 receiving cores would be, or if you just disagree or agree with anything. Let's get some nice comments in there too, guys. Not just telling us how awful we are. Let us know where we got maybe a little bit right too. But that's what we got for our top 10 receiving cores in the college football. Be on the lookout for more videos previewing the 2024 college football season basically every single day until the start of the season.